Chapter 1. The Waiting Tower. The tower leaned against the sky like an old woman listening for news that never came. Its cedar bones exhaled with every gust of wind, and the smell of resin clung to the walls, thick and sharp, mixing with the smoke from oil lamps that had burned for too many seasons to count. The wood sighed in the fading heat, tired from carrying the weight of waiting women and whispered prayers. Mara stood at the high window, the world stretched beneath her in layers of green and gold. The forest swelled outward from the valley, restless, swallowing what remained of the old world, fences, roads, rusted machines now strangled by vines. It was said that trees here grew faster than memory itself, that roots could outlive bloodlines. She pressed her hand against the cool stone ledge and tried to breathe evenly. The child inside her shifted, pressing a hard heel beneath her ribs. A wave of pressure bloomed low in her belly, stealing her breath. She rubbed the spot, whispering, "Not yet, little one," though her voice shook as much as her hands. The air carried the taste of coming cold, a metallic tang that lingered on her tongue. Outside, the light fell low and long, stretching the shadows of the tower across the earth. The sun bled orange at the edges, softening into plum and smoke. The smell of dusk rolled in, turned soil, ash, and the faint sweetness of drying grain. Mara closed her eyes. How many nights had she stood in this tower with her sisters and cousins, watching the horizon for the first column of smoke that meant the hunters were returning? She had watched them every year since she was old enough to climb the stairs, clutching a wool shawl around her shoulders while her mother whispered the same old promise, "They always come home, child. The forest may swallow the rest of the world, but not them." They hadn't always come home. She remembered the year they didn't, 2 years ago, when the bells never rang and the sky turned gray from the smoke of the morning pyres. She remembered standing right here, younger and still girlish, as the women around her began to scream. Her mother had dropped to her knees. Her aunt had torn the scarf from her own hair. The sound of grief had shaken the tower itself until dust rained from the beams. The 300th day, the day of no return. 3 days left before the bells would toll for the dead. She ran her tongue over cracked lips, her breath frosting against the glass. Callen, her husband, had led this year's hunt, his first time as hunt leader. He had kissed her brow the morning he left, promised to bring back more than any season before. "Enough for 2 winters," he'd said. "Enough for our child to be born into plenty." The further they went to scavenge, the greater the risk. The old cities lay deeper now beneath trees, bridges collapsed into rivers, beasts crept closer to their routes. Every season the hunters ventured farther, chasing the last relics of the world that had burned 22 years ago in the blackout. Mara rested her forehead on the cold pane. "Please," she whispered into the dusk. "Let him come home." The child rolled again, slow and heavy, as if answering her. Behind her came the soft rasp of skirts and the steady rhythm of feet that knew this tower by heart. "Still watching?" Leslie's voice was a hush, deep and low, like the river under ice. Mara didn't turn. "If I stop, the dark will come quicker." Leslie chuckled under her breath, the sound carrying both fondness and fatigue. "The dark comes when it chooses, girl. Staring won't hold it back." She moved closer, the lamplight catching the silver threads in her hair. The lines on her face softened as she studied Mara, the trembling shoulders, the fingers clutching the windowsill, the roundness of her belly straining against the linen dress. 3 days yet," Leslie said quietly, touching Mara's arm. "A lot can happen in 3 days." Her gaze dipped to Mara's belly. "Especially here." Mara wanted to believe her. She wanted the calm in Leslie's voice to settle over her like a blanket. But the longer she waited, the louder her thoughts became. "You've got Eva's eyes. she might say quietly. In her habit of biting her tongue when she's scared. She used to do that too, in the first winters. It's colder than last year, she murmured. The air feels meaner. The harvest came early. The birds left early. Everything's ending early this year. Leslie said nothing at first. Her eyes wandered out the window, to the forest thick with nightfall. Her brow furrowed for just a breath before she smoothed it away. Seasons turn as they will. The cold comes, then life follows. That is how it has always been, here and before here. Mara turned from the window, looking at the older woman's hands, the small burns from lamps, the pale scars from rope and harvest, the thin ring carved of river bone she still wore on her right finger. The teacher's hands, people call them, gentle enough to calm a frightened child, strong enough to lift a shovel when the graves needed digging. You don't look worried, Mara said softly. I am not, Leslie replied, her tone steady as a heartbeat. Then she smiled, a slow curve of her mouth that almost convinced them both. We have seen too many winters, too many hunts. They always come home. But when Leslie thought Mara wasn't looking, her gaze drifted again to the horizon, her lashes low, her mouth drawn tight. Mara noticed. She said nothing. Some truths were too fragile to speak aloud. Below, the valley stirred with its evening rhythm. The ring of Arya's hammer rose and fell from the gatehouse, a clear, bright sound that cut through the cooling air. Quinn's voice followed, sharp and clipped, giving orders as the women hung the welcome banners that might yet go unseen. From the fields came Odia's warm singing, calling the harvesters in from the light. The smell of grain and smoke drifted upward, softening the air in the tower. This was Riverside's covenant. Each woman's work feeding the next. No one louder than another, no one sacrifice greater. Mara thought of the stories Leslie told when she was small, except they weren't just stories. They were memories. Leslie had been there, one of the 5 women who first stood among the ruin and the ash when the world went dark. She had helped turn chaos into rhythm, hunger into order. Leslie and the other founding mothers had remade time itself after the blackout, when the sky had been nothing but ash and static. Leslie eased herself into the chair beside her, the floorboards sighing beneath her weight. You know, she said, glancing toward the fading sky, we've gone 4 full quins without error, 20 years of every hunt returning just as they should. We cannot let one bad season haunt us forever. Mara nodded weakly. Leslie's words carried weight. 4 quins without loss was something to be proud of. Leslie tilted her head, eyes narrowing against the last orange streaks of light. We've had hunters return in the 13th month before, she said gently. Just because the days are nearly done doesn't mean they won't walk through that gate again. It's happened before, and it can happen again. Her tone was calm, almost teasing now, but her eyes softened as she looked at Mara's belly. A lot can change in 3 days, you know. Mara had dreamed her child would be born at the height of that joy, when music echoed through the fields, when Callen's laugh filled their home. Instead, she sat here, surrounded by silence and cold glass, her body tightening with the threat of labor. Leslie reached into her satchel and drew out a strip of dried fruit, breaking it in 2. Eat, she said, handing half to Mara. You need strength for believing. Mara managed a smile, though tears pricked her eyes. You sound like my mother. I sound like every mother, Leslie replied, chewing thoughtfully. Her eyes softened again, but there was something else behind them, an old, quiet grief she carried like a secret. The lamps flickered, the shadows stretched longer. Mara rose, restless, and crossed to the other side of the room. The pain in her lower back pulsed like a drum. She traced the carvings on the wall, names etched by waiting women, dates, prayers, crude hearts with initials that time had almost erased. I used to think the tower was alive, Mara said softly. That it listened when we called to it. My sisters and I would stay awake all night, whispering to the walls. We'd make promises, that our men would come home, that our children would be strong, that we'd never be the ones left to mourn.
Leslie's eyes shone in the lamplight. Maybe it does listen, she said. Maybe that's why it leans toward the valley, it's trying to hear them coming. Mara smiled faintly. You sound like Quinn when she's trying to make the children behave. She learned her stories from me, Leslie said, her laugh soft and deep, carrying both warmth and weariness. The wind rose outside, bending the trees until they whispered against one another, a language of branches and leaves. The tower swayed with them, its old frame groaning like something half asleep. Leslie stood, went to the window beside Mara, and rested her hand over the younger woman's. Together they watched the last sliver of sun sink below the forest. 3 days left, Leslie murmured again. And 3 nights for miracles. Mara leaned into the glass. The cold bit through her skin, through the fabric stretched over her belly. She thought of Callen's hands on her face, the way he'd brushed her temple before he left. She thought of the sound of his laugh when he promised he'd be back before the frost. She thought of the space he left behind in their bed, and how she still reached for him in the dark, out of habit, out of faith. Below, the first lamps in Riverside flickered to life, small constellations scattered across the valley. The scent of wood smoke rose, mingling with the crisp bite of the evening air. Mara pressed her palm against the glass one last time. Somewhere out there, she told herself, he was walking toward her, through cold rivers, through ruins, through the endless green. She imagined him carrying the sound of her heartbeat like a lantern. Leslie watched her, quiet. For a moment, the teacher's mask slipped, her brow drew tight, her eyes caught the lamplight with a shimmer that might have been worry, might have been longing. Then she smoothed it away, her voice soft and certain once more. They always find their way home, she said. And as darkness fell over the valley, both women stood in silence, waiting for the forest to answer.